Welcome to the Find Your Leadership Confidence podcast with Vicki Noethling. You are about to discover impactful lessons that help you grow as an individual, grow your confidence, and find the positive and good within you, so you powerfully and authentically become the best version of yourself. Be sure you visit our website at www.findyourleadershipconfidence.com. While you're there, subscribe to us via your favorite network. Now tune in, get ready, and enjoy the journey of emerging as a leader of exception in the 21st century.
Welcome, everyone, to the Find Your Leadership Confidence podcast. I'm your host, Vicki Noethling, coming to you from Roswell, Georgia. The goal of this podcast is to bring topics and guests that will empower you to become that confident leader and take your business and your life to the next level. Today, please join me in welcoming Erin Hatzikostas.
Perfect.
And let me tell you about her background. So in the fall of 2018, she decided to leave what was arguably a dream job. After over 20 years in the corporate world, she had led a storybook turnaround, and then she decided to walk away from it all. Driven by both disgust and how fake the working world had become, and an excitement that she had proved out that authenticity isn't just a nice to have, but rather a weapon that can bring people and companies out of their miserable vortex and set out to change the workplace forever. Erin now is internationally recognized for the impact of authenticity in the workplace. She is the founder of Be Authentic, Inc., which she's leading a movement to eradicate the workplace of its BS and make it a fundamentally more authentic place. She's the best-selling author of You Do You-ish, a TEDx speaker, coach consultant, and a co-host of the offbeat career and leadership podcast, Be Coursework Doesn't Have to Suck. Her talks have reached hundreds of thousands of people, and her thought leadership has been featured on CBS, ABC, and published in Business Insider, Fast Company, Well Plus Good, and among many others. Today, we are going to talk just about making authenticity your weapon of choice. Please join me in welcoming Erin Hatzikostas.
Thank you, Vicki.
Well, such an impressive background, and we'll let you get into a little bit more of that in a minute, but I always start with a very easy question for you. Tell everybody, what part of the country do you call home? Where do you live?
It's actually not easy when Uber drivers and stuff ask me, "Oh, where are you from?" I still say I'm from Michigan, but I live in Connecticut. But I've been in Connecticut for more than half my life now.
Oh, so you're like me. I always say I'm from Pittsburgh, but I actually live now longer here in Georgia than I did in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I think us Midwesterners, it's harder to take us away from saying, we're from the Midwest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. I always say, they say, where's home? Well, it's Pittsburgh, but I'm not moving back. Sorry, guys.
Exactly.
So how, I gave, the business side of your background, the backstory, but I always like for you to just give us a little bit about the journey that took you from, just this young person thinking, I'm going to change the world, to where you are today.
Yeah. So I was a young person, probably that didn't think they were going to change the world. I knew that I wanted to do sort of big, exciting things, but being from a small town, sort of every step of the journey was exploration, not strategy. And so my journey for my first half of my career started in my sophomore year. I was at Western Michigan University, and I had dropped out of engineering. Didn't know what I was going to do. I knew I wasn't going to be in engineering, but I was still taking math classes. And my roommate was actually a year older. So she was in the business college. And that day they had done, some sort of like oh, here are the careers out there, right? And she came home and she like so jacked up. She like flew in the door like Kramer on Seinfeld. And she's like, oh my God, Erin, I found it. I found the career for you. And I was like, okay, Amy, what is it? And she's like, no, 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 no. It's high pay, low stress. And you just have to be good at math. And you're the only person I know who's good at math. And I was like, oh, I'm
Thanks.
listening. And
Thanks.
she's like, it's called an actuary. And I was like, oh, that sounds sexy, right? This is 1996, right? So no Googling just how cool or uncool an actuary might be. So being the impressionable young sort of, I call myself a little bit of an instant gratification whore. I was like the next day in the library, researching what this actuary was. And I remember there were, I would go up to the fourth floor looking for all the books. I think it was maybe like the non-section career section, and there was nothing
Yeah.
except for, as you might imagine with an actuary, there was like this beige, like 5x7 pamphlet. And all it did inside of it, you opened it up, you could still see it. And it would just list the name of the company, their physical address, and their phone number. And these were companies that employed actuaries. And being, the smart mouth person, I noticed a trend that a lot of them were in Connecticut, because so many insurance companies were here, at least at the
Yeah.
time. And so what I like to say is I don't know how I did it, but I called, I guess. It's so foreign to us now, and swindled my way into a couple of interviews out in Connecticut. And might have told a little white lie, like, I'm going to be out there already for spring break. You might as well interview me. Meanwhile, I had no plane ticket. And later, fun fact, later I found out, this is the naive small town girl. They would have actually paid for me to plane ticket out. And I was like, oh my God, I spent like $300 for nothing. But I got an internship with Aetna's pretty esteemed actuarial program. I think they took 10 or 12 interns every year. And I know, by the way, now that I got in because of my authenticity, my interviewing, not because I had no actuarial exams that had been passed. And so then I did that and then came back full time. And in just 3 years, it's amazing what happened. I took 7 actuarial exams and I failed 7 actuarial exams, like not passed a one, which is humbling for anyone. But even though I'm from a very small town, 87 kids in my class, I did graduate second in my class. So I kind of been a winner. I got high grades in college. And then I, traveled 900 miles out east and literally failed at my first career. But the good news is I was at a big company that, I always say I jumped out before they kicked me out and took a different role and was able to sort of bob and weave my way through, started to get the messages about, imposter syndrome and faking it till you make it, and just being a little brave. I wore my glasses like that I didn't even need till I was about 33, because I started to get in some roles that were definitely over my skis. And then in 2012, I actually took a job. I say actually, I took a step back a little bit. I had been leading about 40 people. And we had this acquired company though, and I was just itching for something new. And they sort of recruited me over, but it was a job where nobody, at first at least, was reporting to me, which you know how that feels, right? In the corporate space, it's all about the like, people are going to look in the Outlook and see like, I no longer have people under me, and what will they think? But it was the best move I ever made. And basically every time somebody would leave from the acquired company, they would sort of look around and be like, okay, well, maybe we should give it to Erin. And there's a lot in between there, but I eventually became the CEO of that company. And there's stories for another day that I tell in my book about it wasn't a straight line. But here's this small town girl who was so not striving for a CEO, had no qualifications to be a CEO, and took over. It sounds super sexy, but it wasn't, because the company was not in a good place.
Wow.
It was kind of your typical, let's buy a cool tech company and then let's like not give it the resources and funding
Wow.
it needs to do things right. So it'd been about 4 years of stumbling. And so when I took it over, I remember specifically a couple of people like, are you sure? And I was like, I don't know. I'm not sure. But what's crazy in 3 years, unlike my actuarial exams, in 3 years, we actually tripled earnings. We took them flat. They were flat at 17 million for many years. in 3 years, they jumped to 50 million. Employee engagement went up 12 percentage points. But here's the important part of the story. Even though things were going really well, I admittedly quietly always felt like, when am I going to be found out?
Yeah.
Or when's my luck going to run out? It was like somewhere in
Right.
between
Right.
those two. And the reason wasn't imposter syndrome. Like I said, I had the memo on that. It was that I literally, this is back in the days where I literally could sit next to my peers, because we had monthly business reviews, we had quarterly business reviews. We sat in a conference room. Most of us were based in the same location. They were running other businesses. And I wasn't sacrificing as much as them. They were jumping on planes every week. They would report out, I met with this customer in Cleveland and this customer in San Francisco. And I was like, I only can handle like one a month because I've got a family at home, And they were, my friend moved her family 3 different times in 5 years just to kind of sort of jump into different roles, or giving up, vacations. And, I was working hard. Don't get me wrong. I'm not a sloth, of course, but I wasn't sacrificing as much. And then, in 2018, I just got the itch that I always get for something new, but everything within the company just kind of didn't scratch it. It just felt like, okay, new product, same playbook. And so I decided to retire. Retired at the age of 44. I mean, technically I was not really retiring, right? And when I announced that, of course, people were pretty surprised, because it's not like things were going badly. And they kept saying over and over again, we'll miss your authentic leadership. I heard it from so many people. And it's not like I was surprised they said, that I was authentic, but that wasn't a badge I had been pinned with before.
Yeah.
And after I collected some of those badges, I finally realized I wasn't going to be found out, that I was actually playing a totally different game than everybody else. And that my authenticity, which took me a little longer to figure this out. It took me sitting down to write my book, as that does, was actually my strategy. Like, it was purposeful, not consciously for me then. I had been programmed by my father and was lucky to sort of have built up these experiments. But I used it to, instead of working harder, instead of being that person that did everything better, I did things a little bit differently. And, it helped in negotiations. It had definitely helped in talent acquisition, because who doesn't want to go work for the leader that everybody whispers is authentic or cool or genuine or whatever.
Right.
It helped me gain the trust and attention of senior leadership, because, I was a little different in those quarterly business reviews. I was kind of telling stories, or not BSing that everything, I was putting reds and not just greens and yellows. And, and so it created this, this great trust. And so when I left, I didn't know what I was going to do. And then after a little bit of experimentation and some blogging and avoiding, quite frankly, this space for a few reasons, I realized, oh my gosh, I have not only this thing where I think so many people hear about authenticity, like it's like this permission to be myself, which is not what it's not what it means. I realized it was it was more nuanced, and B, it not only made it easier for me to say yes to the big jobs and not hate my job, but it is the thing that got results. And I saw it. I still see it. So many people are programmed into doing things right. And companies say they want to stand out, but like their proposals look the same. Their websites, they use buzzwords, that they focus on innovation, that's technology. And they don't see that using authenticity and being a little bit different and being a little creative. And I'm super excited to talk to your audience in the entrepreneurship space and how you can use that actually can be, as you put it, your weapon of choice.
Yeah, absolutely. And, whenever you talk about all those things too, it makes you be able to retain good people because of the atmosphere that they have to work in.
Yeah. Yep. We have the data to prove it. Yeah. We looked at all of that, and you're absolutely right.
So how do you manage to get more, not more done, but the right things done? We often see people really busy all the time, but are they doing the right things?
Yeah. I mean, I think, one of the cores of authenticity is this simple, like, do what's needed, not what's normal. And I think so many people are burnt out, and part of it's not their fault, because they're, they've got leaders that are making, but because they're focused on kind of what's normal, i.e. like, this is the playbook and we've got to do this thing and we've got to fill, versus what is truly needed. And so sometimes authenticity is simple as like, okay, I'm going to be in the entrepreneur space, let's say I'm going to be doing a webinar or sending out an email, like stopping and not thinking about what's normal, because Lord knows there's a lot of playbooks and trainings and crap that we digest as entrepreneurs, and really sit on the other side and say, well, if I was getting that email, if I was at that webinar, what am I sick of? And what am I craving? Right. And what do I need to do different? And I think if you start to do that, and really start to get rid of the BS work, I actually just talked about this a lot yesterday, with someone in my next book, which is called The 50% Rule, which I really do want to talk about, not because I'm promoting, and it's not out till October, but because I think what I talk about around authenticity is helpful for everyone. I think when you're talking about entrepreneurs, the 50% rule is a game changer. And just to stick with your question, and then maybe we'll back up. Part of the 50% rule, which is essentially says, whenever you do something new or listen to somebody or whatever, only take about half of it, and then merge that with half of what your ideas are. So do sort of half normal, half new. But one of the things, back to like, how do you sort of just focus on what's really needed? One principle of the 50% rule is you got to cut out like half of the BS. And one of the stories I tell in the book is actually about Shopify. I don't know if you heard about this, but in 2022, they got really bold with their meetings. And they, their COO, they basically developed this, like, I call it this cute little bot that like went in and, for example, looked for any meeting that had more than 3 people that was recurring, and like took a laser beam to it and wiped it out. And, they said, look, if you still need this meeting in a couple of weeks, go ahead and put it on. But they took a really bold approach. They took a step further, and they put a meeting cost calculator that they bolted onto Outlook. So picture if you're going to, schedule a meeting and there's 7 people, it basically looked at, okay, VP average salary, hour, director average, and said, your meeting's going to cost you, $6,500. Are you sure you need it? And this is authenticity, right? This is saying, like, let's stop going through the motions and doing what's normal. Let's help our people. Let's not just lip service it and say like, make sure your meetings are, fruitful or whatever. They actually did something about it. And what's really cool, because entrepreneurs, like, you're like, it's all about the bottom line. You can't correlate it 100%, but if you look at their stock price in January of 2022, which is when they reportedly started doing this, and you look at it a year later, it roughly doubled. It's incredible. So, that's how authenticity really manifests itself and what you're talking about. It's really about cutting out the BS and focusing on what's actually needed and not just trying to get it right.
Yeah, I know. My career that I retired from was a project manager, and my saying was, I'm not having a meeting just for the sake of meetings, because people, that was the norm. Everybody was just like, well, we have to have meetings and this and that. I was like, no, I don't need to have everybody and their brother at that meeting. I just need people that will get the work done at that meeting. So
right.
And I can send those other people an email that tells them what we talked about.
Right. The VPs and the directors and they don't need to be there just to show face.
No, right. And sometimes it holds things up too, takes people off focus and track. No offense,
100%,
people, but
100%.
So on your website, you say authenticity is something that you can purposefully, strategically, and systematically do to attract and retain talent, negotiate with business partners, gain attention, and buy in from others to build immediate trust and ultimately achieve incredible results. And so we've been talking about that so far during this podcast, but it's really, I think people will maybe scratching their head and saying, well, how can I do all that with this? So can we kind of break that down a little bit and just talk about just certain areas, maybe not all of that because it's a lot, but just some really key areas like retaining talent, the right talent, and maybe gaining attention.
Yeah. So, I think first you have to understand that authenticity is not probably what you think it is.
Yeah.
It is not synonymous with be yourself. It is not synonymous with transparency. People ask me all the time, but Erin, can you ever be too authentic? And I'm like, no, but you can be too transparent. The Greek root word is authentikos, which means to be genuine, but it also means to be original and authoritative. So being authentic, it's sort of I always say it's like part badass and part being yourself, right? It's like if Kamala Harris and Joe Exotic had a baby, right? And so that's the first thing. The second thing you need to know is that authenticity is not actually about you, especially when you're using it. Well, anytime, if you can start to understand that, I always say, authenticity is sort of my word, it's my brand, it's my everything, but I'm really in the business of connection and trust and intrigue or differentiation, right?
Yeah.
And if you start to recognize that if you are bold enough to be a little more authentic, and what I say is, exposing who you are when people least expect it in the service of others. That's sort of my definition. When you understand that it's a thing that you're doing to gain that, right? That immediate connection and trust, because we all know what it does. We sit on the other side of it. It's like, oh, this person's like imperfect like me. Like my radar goes down.
That's exactly right.
I don't think they're hiding something. And I'm also leaning in a little bit because I was like, I don't really know what they're going to, do next. Because they're not doing the normal hamster wheel. And so our fight or flight sort of wakes us up and we go, well, since they're not doing normal, I kind of want to make sure I don't get, blindsided. So that's, the first thing I always do is I kind of have to reprogram how you think of it and what it really is. I teach in most of my clients today are in the sort of corporate space. Although, like I said, the 50% rule really is such an incredible, I think, entrepreneurial tool. So I'm really excited to spend more time working with sort of fellow entrepreneurs.
Perfect.
But I have, so I have a framework called HUMANS, and it stands for humility, unexpected, model, adapt, narrate, and spark. And what I always say is, look, this isn't the formula of how you need to act. That would be hypocritical. These are training wheels to deprogram you from constantly just kind of like going through the emotions. And so to get specific, like just to give you an example with the first one, humility is a fast pass to connection and trust, right? When you can open up a meeting or, instead of coming, let's say you come onto a call late, like a couple minutes late. I hate it when people are like, I'm sorry, I'm a few minutes late, which is so passive aggressive. Like you're basically saying, I'm sorry, but I'm not really, really late. Like tell them why, especially if it's like, cause you got yogurt on your shirt and you're in the bathroom wiping it off, or that your kid's Barbie just went in the toilet, along with their poop. I don't know, but look for those moments. And when you start to, that's what I try to get people to do is look at each of these principles and start to just practice and experiment with them. Humility is so fun. That principle is so fun because when bad stuff happens to you, you also get excited too. I mean, I'm constantly like, thanks for the material, and sometimes that's to myself, like, thanks for the material, you idiot. Or, maybe it's a guy makes like a weird comment and I'm like, thanks for the material. I will use that, right? To create connection and trust. Thanks for filling up my bucket. And so that's what I teach, which, obviously is important in all aspects of your life, whether you're corporate entrepreneur or your friendships, but especially in that corporate world. I think the problem is we're so used to acting like business buzzword bingo players. On the entrepreneurial side, I do think that the message of authenticity is probably, a little more prolific. I think you see it more in personal branding and smaller entrepreneurs, maybe not so much in like larger as they start to become more corporate. But where the problem lies on the entrepreneurial side is a little bit different. On the entrepreneurial side, it's similar but different. We're inundated, right, with the latest technique and the way to capture more clients and the best email open rate strategies and all this crud. And so even though we might say, well, I'm doing it authentic, my video, I'm using humility, I'm like being myself, Instagram, I'm definitely, myself and my reels, I'm funny. You are, that is different. But on the entrepreneurial side, there still is this issue. And I know because I went through it and I see so many people go through it. We were so programmed to take 100% and learn 100% of what other people do and not make it original. Right. Like, which is one of the core principles. And that's why, the 50% rule, I think, is really a game changer for entrepreneurs. So I think for entrepreneurs, just really stepping back and saying, like every time I'm doing something, like, what is the intent? What is like about half the things that I really like that they're
Yeah.
doing that feel like me, but throw out the other half and be original, do different things. And it's so powerful that there's much more to it. And, I
Yeah,
always
but
tell people there's so much more to it than that.
and be confident that it's okay. I think that's what we worry so much about. Well, I didn't do it exactly like X person, but it is you. Like, do you? I love your
Yeah.
book. Do you? I
Yeah.
just I just
Well, and
think
it's
that it's
more
okay.
than and yes. And like, so step one is realizing, okay, this is okay for me to do this. But here's the cool thing. And the reason I wrote 60,000 words and didn't just like post, a couple memes on social media is the next layer is you realize not only is it okay, but when you start to put together 50 and 50, and there's different sort of stories and examples of this 50%, it's actually what makes you stand out and succeed. I
Mhm.
tell stories about, Hamilton is a perfect example.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
50% rule, right? Why did Hamilton? So first of all, that is not the first time Hamilton was put on Broadway. It was put on Broadway by this woman back in like the 1920s. Great play, but it wasn't 50% ruled. It was traditional, but it only ran for like 3 months, right?
Mm.
And it's also not the first time that hip hop was used. Lin-Manuel Miranda actually used hip hop in his other first Broadway play, In the Heights. But that's sort of expected because In the Heights was a modern day setting. It was a Latin X sort of people and telling that story. And so hip hop was like, yeah, that makes sense. That's sort of more, a little bit more ties in with their culture. Why Hamilton exploded beyond, don't get me, I mean, it's genius. And if you
It
haven't,
is.
have
It
you
is.
seen it, Vicki?
Oh yes,
Yeah, I
several
mean,
times.
if you're listening, you haven't seen it, like
Go.
you don't die without going. Bucket
Mm.
list. But the reason that is such an incredible sensation, record breaking, Tony Awards, et cetera, is because the 50% rule took half normal, which was, the Broadway play, the, dancing, et cetera, really juxtaposed it with something totally unexpected, which is using, Black and Latino actors for white dudes who used to write with feather pens, and hip hop for them, and really combining. So, once you really dive into some of the core principles that the 50% rule uncovers, you'll realize it's way more than okay. It's actually the thing. Like I always say, I'll take you from underdog to unmatched in a hot second.
Mhm. And the really, it's such a great example because that play, with all that happens in it and all that it brings, attracts an audience that Broadway had not had. I mean, kids in middle school, high school that hear the music are attracted to watch the play, which would never have if
Correct.
it hadn't done that
Yeah,
50%
when
rule.
I first saw it, and admittedly, I was a little late. I just first saw it last summer. My husband and I went, and I left, and like either that night or the next night, I got tickets for my kids to go see it the next week before it left town. I mean, I was just like,
Yeah,
I have to see it. Yeah.
yeah. So very cool. All right. So while almost half of the employees report that authenticity is listed in their company's corporate values, you stated that in your and great, you all have to go to her website because she has some wonderful research reports out there. But 16% report that it is something always practiced in their company. So half say that it's listed as like this core value, but only 16% say that it's practiced. And I was in corporate for over 40 years, and I can say that that is very true. Um, so share with us, why is there such a disconnect?
Yeah. I mean, so first of all, that's the absolute worst, right? Like saying something and then not doing. I think you're better off not saying it at all.
Yeah.
Why isn't it? I think specifically I mean, we could have a broader conversation about cultures and like why that, but specifically for authenticity, um, I think everybody wants that, but they don't know how to enact it. That's why I love what I do so much, because I really treat it like tangible experiments, things you need to do, versus like some Forbes article that says you need to be more, caring and blah, 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 right? And then you're like, forward it to your boss. And then, a week later, everything's the same. So I think there's an intangibility, like there's a desire and it when you see it. But there's an intangibility that you have in executing it. I think the other thing is that the current runneth strongeth in the corporate workplace to be inauthentic. And people always say, why? And I'm like, I don't know, because some white dude in probably 1965 did something that was successful, and then people followed it, and we follow, and so it's this built up, it's like a bad pipe with like build up residue that just has been going forever, but the stream's like rushing so fast, so it's hard to like, I don't know, I'm mixing metaphors. It's sort of hard to like swim against the guck and the pressure of it. And so if you, one, are sort of swimming in a stream that's carrying you one direction with a pretty strong current, and two, you don't know what tangibly you need to do different in a world where you're sort of heads down working nonstop, it's pretty hard to enact it. And that's why, the companies that really want to make authenticity their strategists, that's the reason that they work with me. And we don't, I do just an infusion, right? I do a keynote talk or a workshop, but my best clients understand that it's true change management. And so I have a whole curriculum, and we do group coaching and application, and I make it really tangible. And what's the best about authenticity? I always tell people, like, I don't change people, I change their addiction. And what I mean by that is that when you start to do things differently and you start to use some of my core principles and just strategies and little things, like stupid little things, like change your out of office to not sound like a robot. It's easy to get addicted, because then you're like, oh my gosh, Sally, the VP, who's super stuffy, wrote me back and said, oh, I have a daughter who plays softball too, and how'd she do in her tournament? Or you start to collect these data points, and it's hard not to get addicted, right? And change, not because you're supposed to, but because you're like, wow, I got the attention of somebody I didn't normally. Wow, people smiled in the town hall versus were on their phones. Like, once you start to see the effects of your little authenticity experiments, I always say, read my book or do my workshops, but like, you should not need me after like 6 months, because then it's just if you truly practice it, you're going to be so addicted like I am. And you're just gonna be like, why would I act any other way? It's like such a shortcut to trust and connection and standing out. And then it just becomes, your normal operating procedure.
And it really does need to start from the top down. Like, it's so wonderful that you as the CEO were able to show and lead, because, at least, and the companies that I work for were pretty large. And there were groups, factions that led authentically and were fine, but the company was not impacted enough because the leaders weren't showing and demonstrating that.
I would agree that's optimal. I would caution that is the barrier. And I'll tell you a quick story. So yes, I was the CEO, but I was CEO of a subsidiary company. I had a boss's boss, right? I had an executive VP that had a bunch of subsidiary companies, and then I had the president of the company, 50,000 person company. And that president of the parent of Aetna, so we had our client, annual client meeting for my company that I was CEO, and it was in Boston. So it was close by. She's originally from Boston. So got her to come speak. And let me just tell you, Vicki, like, the months leading up to it are totally what you expect. Like, a million meetings with their corporate comms person, and they should put together PowerPoints and talking point, and it's like, oh my gosh, like, it's great to have her, but it's not so great to have her coming. And so it was this whole rigmarole, right? Meanwhile, because I'd been riding the authenticity train, I like changed mine last minute, because the night before we met one of the Hall of Fame Boston Red Sox, and he told this story. So I incorporated it into mine. It was just something naturally, metaphorical that I was good at doing. And so I tell this whole story. I don't think I had any slides, maybe a couple. And so she went after me, and she walked up there and she said, you know what? I have all these slides, but we're going to forget about them, and I'm just going to talk. And I tell you that story because authenticity is contagious in all directions. And yes, is it a heck of a lot easier if the top 100%, but don't let that stop you, because you can inspire. I always say, even as CEO, like, I tell my boss like once every 2 weeks. That was not where my inspiration came from. My inspiration came from my team, right? Because that's who I spent all the time with, regardless of that they were under me. So I really encourage people um, to realize then that's why Spark is the S in humans, to create that contagion and understand it can swim uphill.
Awesome. Such great advice. You have two books in our last few minutes here. You talked about your 50%, quite a lot, but what is the premise of You Do You, Unleash Your Authentic Superpowers to Get the Career You Deserve? Talk a little bit more about what
Yeah.
they'll find in that book.
Yeah. So to be clear, the one that's out right now is You Do You-ish, the Unleash one. The 50% rule doesn't come out until October. It's written though, so that's why I can talk about it. So because I know exactly what's in it, but it's with my publisher and editing. So You Do You-ish. First of all, and my first line in chapter 1 is I hate books. And I say that because I don't hate all books, but I hate most nonfiction books, because I feel like in order to get the, 1 to 3 nuggets of wisdom, you got to read like 250 plus pages of boring stuff. And I was lucky enough when I read Jen Sincero's You Are a Badass. Have you ever read that, Vicki? Yeah.
No.
Okay. So, and it's the content's really great, but more importantly for me as an inspiring author, it told me, oh wait, you can write like nonfiction, prescription nonfiction, but fun and sassy and metaphorically. So You Do You-ish is first and foremost, it's indulgent, like it's funny, it's super snarky, it's got a lot of barnyard language. So if you don't like that, I know you're a Southern girl, but I basically I write like I talk. And what it does is really a little bit of what we're talking about. It helps you understand that authenticity isn't what you think it is, that it is something more tangible. I also talk about, before you change or start to do your experiments and being more authentic, you got to get rid of your sucky songs. So there is a whole section on sucky songs that we sing
Nice.
and sort of to reprime the paint, if you will. And then I talk about the humans framework and give you tangible things within each of those principles that you can start doing in your business and in your career. And then I end it with some, inspirational and silly stories about Easter egg hunts and prints and things like that. So it's, I think that's what I'm most proud of. People that read it are like, oh my God, I read it in 2 days. It was fun. And I learned something. And so that's what, and it demonstrates what authenticity is, right? I felt like if I would have written a traditional expected book, then I would have gone against all the principles I talk about. So that's what's in You Do You.
Good. Excellent. All right, so it's time now for me to share my screen that has contact information. If you have been just listening, you know the drill. You should have been taking notes all along from all the great things that have been shared today. But if not, run and grab paper pen right now. If you can't, if you're driving or unable to, I will have all this in my show notes on my YouTube channel, as well as findyourleadershipconfidence.com. So the website is beauthentic.inc.com, beauthentic.inc.com. You can find her on social media all over the place. Facebook, she is at Be Authentic Inc. Again, that's a small B, capital A, and Inc. is a capital I. Instagram is her name, and that's ErinHatzikostas. LinkedIn is her name as well. Twitter, Because, and that's BCAUSE podcast, Because podcast. YouTube is at Be Authentic Inc. 5074. I'm going to turn it over to Erin to talk to you just what you'll find on her website and her preferred social media places for you to check out.
Yeah. So because many of you are entrepreneurs, I think a couple things on the website. First of all, you're listening to a podcast. So if you're looking for other podcasts to add to your repertoire, we have a podcast currently called Because Work Doesn't Have to Suck. Now I say currently because we're experimenting with a format that I'm actually already addicted to. We've done a couple of episodes now called Buck That. that I think we might actually rebrand to. And Buck That is a simple concept. Instead of a long format interview or every other episode of Because actually is my co-host and I, Nicole and I, sort of talking about her work woes and real-time coaching, which is really fun and it's been great. But Buck That is a concept where we just have somebody tell one story every week of where they bucked the norm and great things happened. And so we had this concept and then we released our first one this week and I'm like, oh my God, I absolutely love it. So that's the first thing. So, if you go to the website, you can find whatever the heck we're calling our podcast, but you can check that out. We've done over 240 episodes. So been around a while. And then, honestly, because remember at the beginning, I said, don't do what's normal, do what's needed. If you're an entrepreneur listening to this, get on my email list. I don't normally say this. We don't email a ton, but the 50% rule, I just really believe so much in the concept, in the book. I love the book so dang much, like to the point where I'm like addicted to it. And you can sort of get on the email list and we'll tell you when that's coming out, which should start. Pre-sales, I think, are going to start July 13th of this year because it's my 50th birthday. So we're gonna try to make that happen as well. And then social, I'm mostly on LinkedIn. You can find me a little behind the scenes on Instagram, but connect with me on LinkedIn. That's where I share most of my stuff and I interact daily with people. So I'd love to do the same with you.
Well, Erin, as you said, we could have several different segments on different parts of what we talked about today. It's just been really refreshing to hear what you say. You are the type of author that I like to read. I know another Erin that has a book written similar to how your book is, Erin King. And
I actually
you're kind of a big
deal. You want a quick funny story?
Yes.
So I met Erin King because her publisher reached out when she was getting ready to release that and asked me for a blurb. And I said, are you sure? You sure she wants it from me? Like, I'm not really that well known. And I was sort of confused. She's like, no. She loves your book. Well, we went back and forth. I met her. What we found out was there's also a book, You Do You, which is by Sarah Knight. Sarah Knight has a bunch of, super sassy books, and including You Do You. I think mine's about her, but whatever. And so she sort of, and she's got, obviously a big following. And so she confused me with her, but I actually did a blurb for Erin. I got to know her. I was on her podcast. I love, her book is very sassy, very similar in style. Like, that's funny.
I think, for me, both of you just bring a light whenever you, show up. So it's awesome. All right. So again, it's just been wonderful chatting with you, having a great conversation about a topic that I think is really, really important. So everybody needs to go out there and connect with Erin, see how you can become more authentic, and definitely get in that mailing list so that you can find out when that 50% is going to come out, because that is going to be another great book. As always, I remind everyone, life is a journey, and it's up to you to enjoy the ride. This is Vicki Noethling, signing off.
Thank you for tuning into the Find Your Leadership Confidence podcast with Vicki Noethling, where we share impactful lessons that help you grow as an individual, grow your confidence, and find the positive and good within you so you powerfully and authentically become the best version of yourself. Remember to visit our website at www.findyourleadershipconfidence.com and enjoy even more great episodes like this one. Again, while you're here, subscribe to us via your favorite network. We look forward to seeing you next time on the Find Your Leadership Confidence podcast.